So what's fascinating about Daniel, the book of Daniel, is that it starts, chapter 1 and the first couple of verses start with judgment on Judah. So God used Babylon to bring judgment on Judah. You get to chapter 5 and you see God bringing judgment on Babylon itself. And with that, God brought judgment to Judah because they had turned away from God. And they'd had lots and lots and lots of opportunity to come back to God, to turn back to Him, to stop doing these detestable things and following these idols. And they did not do that. And so Judah as a nation had opportunities and the Word of God, and God said, okay, enough, right? And so that was judgment brought onto them by Babylon. God allowed or used Babylon, the first of the great Gentile kingdoms, to take out Judah. Okay? Now, fascinating, we see Babylon brought up, again referenced in Revelation. And as we get into chapters 7 through 12, we're going to see that again. We're going to look more deeply at that. But about 70 years later, because the Jews were in exile for 70 years. So Babylon held Judah in captivity for 70 years. God said for 70 years they would be exiled from the nation. And 70 years later, Babylon now is on the edge of their own judgment. Again, this is, we'll look at these scriptures, but it was prophesied as early as 150 years before it happened. And God called out Babylon by name and said, you're going to be, you've been all that, but you're not going to be all that anymore. I'm not going to let you keep going on this way. But chapter 5 is this fascinating story. And Belshazzar is the co-ruling king along with his father. And I'm going to show you there's proof of that. And Dr. McGee had that. So Daniel chapter 5, verse 1, we'll look at this story. We're going to take 1 through 12 first. We're going to look at these first 12 verses. So, Belshazzar, the king, held a great feast for 1,000 of his nobles, and he was drinking wine in the presence of the 1,000. When Belshazzar tasted the wine, he gave orders to bring the gold and the silver vessels which Nebuchadnezzar his father had taken out of the temple which was in Jerusalem, so that the king and his nobles, his wives and his concubines, might drink from them. Then they brought the gold vessels that had been taken out of the temple, the house of God, which was in Jerusalem. And the king and his nobles, his wives and his concubines, drank from them. They drank wine and praised the gods of gold and silver and bronze, iron, wood, and stone. Suddenly, in the midst of this party, the fingers of a man's hand emerged and began writing opposite the lampstand on the plaster of the wall in the king's palace. And the king saw the back of the hand that did the writing. Then the king's face grew pale, and his thoughts alarmed him. And his hip joints went slack, and his knees began knocking together. The king called out aloud to bring the conjurers, the Chaldeans, and the diviners. The king spoke and said to the wise men of Babylon, any man who can read this inscription and explain its interpretation to me shall be clothed in purple, and have a necklace of gold around his neck, and have authority as third ruler of the kingdom. So pay attention to that, third ruler of the kingdom. We'll come back to that. Then the king's wise men came in, but they could not read the inscription or make known its interpretation to the king. Then King Belshazzar was greatly alarmed. His face grew even paler, and his nobles were perplexed. The queen entered the banquet hall because of the words of the king and his nobles. And the queen spoke and said, O king, live forever. Do not let your thoughts alarm you or your face be pale. There is a man in your kingdom in whom is a spirit of the holy gods, and in the days of your father, illumination, insight, and wisdom like the wisdom of the gods were found in him. And King Nebuchadnezzar, your father the king, appointed him chief of the magicians, conjurers, Chaldeans, and diviners. This was because an extraordinary spirit, knowledge and insight, interpretation of dreams, explanation of enigmas, and solving of difficult problems were found in this Daniel, whom the king named Belteshazzar. let Daniel now be summoned, and he will declare the interpretation. So this is the queen. So basically, this is his grandmother. I'll cut to the chase here for you. I think that was his grandmother, not his wife, but like the queen mom. So it's either his mother or his grandmother, according to Dr. McGee. So hang on to that for a minute. So those are the first 12 verses. This is the situation. That's the scenario. And she walks into the midst of all this and says, I know a man. I know a guy. All right? So, I know a guy. Dr. McGee says Belshazzar has been a controversial figure in history, and we need to take a moment to look at him. So he points out that theologians, or not theologians, but historians have looked at that and says there was no King Belshazzar of Nebuchadnezzar, or of Babylon. Until, though, the discovery of the Nabonidus cylinder, no mention of Belshazzar, whom Daniel declares to be king of Babylon, had been found in extra-biblical literature. Critics of the authenticity and historicity of Daniel, according, were free to question whether any such person had ever existed. Since the publication of Raymond Doherty's scholarly research on Nabonidus and Belshazzar, passed on the cylinder and other sources, there is no ground for questioning the general truth of Belshazzar. The name Belshazzar has been found on the cylinders, in which he is called the son of Nabonidus. It is now generally accepted that Belshazzar acted as the regent under his father Nabonidus. So you got another name here. All right. So who's this Nabonidus? The resume of events which succeeded Nebuchadnezzar's reign would be helpful, he says. At the death of Nebuchadnezzar, his only son, Evil-Merodach, succeeded him about 561 BC. All right? And Evil-Merodach was murdered by Nergal-Shazzar, who had married one of Nebuchadnezzar's daughters and now replaced him on the throne about 559 BC. Nergal-Shazzar was succeeded by his young son, who reigned only a few months before he was murdered by Nabonidus, the father of another of Nebuchadnezzar's daughters. Nabonidus, the last ruler of Babylon Empire, spent much of his time away from the kingdom on foreign expeditions leading the army. Belshazzar, his son, remained at Babylon as his co-regent. So basically, so Nebuchadnezzar's son was murdered. Another young son came in, he was murdered, and then this son-in-law comes in and takes the throne. So the son-in-law now acts as king of Babylon, the one of Nebuchadnezzar's daughters, right? He's the king. And then they have a son, Belshazzar. And so he leaves Belshazzar as the next in line, but he's co-ruling with him, or as a co-regent is what McGee called him. So that's the scenario here. So you've got Belshazzar, this young king, right, sitting on the throne in Babylon, right? And so he's the one who has the party. But his dad is out with the army. So that's kind of the scenario. You see what's happened here and where chapter 5 is. So Nebuchadnezzar has passed from the scene. And this happened, Babylon fell in 539 BC. So between 561, somewhere in there, Nebuchadnezzar died, right? 562, 561, and that's when his son took over. His son was murdered. And so between 561 and 539 is all these other things that have happened. So you're at 539 now, BC in chapter 5, and that's when Babylon fell. So McGee goes on to say, we have further evidence of Belshazzar from a prayer of Nabonidus to the moon god for his son, which was discovered on the clay cylinder. So they have confirmed that as well. Nabonidus was on the field of battle while Belshazzar, his son, remained in Babylon. He said, we will notice that when Belshazzar offers Daniel a position in the kingdom, it is to be the third ruler in the kingdom. Well, why not the second ruler? If Belshazzar is the king, how come he just doesn't offer him the second ruler in the kingdom, like Nebuchadnezzar did, right? Well, it is to be the third ruler because Belshazzar himself was number 2. His father was really the king. So there's some historical stuff in here that kind of gives credence. But prior to some of that, and McGee's stuff was written 50 years ago. So they may have found other things now to corroborate all this. But McGee put it this way. He said, therefore, the events of this chapter, which for many years have been discounted by critics, have been confirmed by secular history. But I would rather say that secular history has been confirmed by the Word of God, which is a great way to put it. So, does that timeline help at all? So, yeah. That brings that then into context. Chapter 5 is the very last day of the rule of Babylon. All right? Yeah, Connie.
Well, I have a question in verse 11. When the queen came in and said, there's a man in the kingdom
Yes.
who has within him the spirit of the holy gods.
Mm-hmm.
By this time, everybody knows that Daniel is different and has the spirit of the one God, true God.
Right.
So why did she say he has the spirit of the holy little gods? Little gods?
Probably because she's still very pagan in her mindset, right?
Huh.
Mine's lowercase too, though. Yeah.
Is it really?
Yeah. So I'm not sure why that is a difference there, but very likely, not everybody was converted off of Nebuchadnezzar's conversion. Would be one of the things that I would say, and the other thing is
you would think that she'd want to make the great distinction between our little gods and this guy, has the spirit of the holy God.
You would think, right? You would think.
New King James has a capital G in God.
Mm-hmm.
New King James, capital G.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay.
You would think she would,
Well, yeah.
but so there's been a long time, right? There's been almost 25 years, plus or minus here, since Nebuchadnezzar has passed, right? And McGee says in another place, he said Daniel has been retired. He's not involved in this, so he's been set aside. He's off, and this younger generation has no idea, right?
8 years old, it says.
Yeah. It's like asking somebody who's 18-year-old now, do you know who the Beatles were?
Mm-hmm.
Who? Right? In one way, it'd be kind of like that, because they don't know who Daniel is. And what is fascinating here, we're going to see in just a second, that Belshazzar had heard about him.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
He'd heard about him, but he didn't know him. He'd never met him, even though he's still hanging around. Right? Yeah.
Kind of like today, they've heard about you.
Yeah. Yep. Exactly. And I think there's some parallels there. We're going to talk about that here in a minute too.
So at this point in time, Daniel is not, working as, high up in the court of the kings.
It doesn't appear to be.
Okay.
Yeah, because and I'll get to you. I'll give you where we're going here.
Falling away.
Look at verse 16. Jump down to verse 16. Belshazzar says to him, I personally have heard of you, that you are able to give interpretations and solve difficult problems. Now, if you are able to read an inscription, right? So in other words, I've heard of you, but I don't know you. I've never met you. I've heard about you, kind of thing. So, and McGee even said that, it would appear that Daniel was not active in the day-to-day activities of the kingdom at that point.
Do we know of anything that the Babylonians would have transcribed, written, or whatever about Nebuchadnezzar when he was out on pasture?
I don't know the answer to that. I think, what is hard, I think, what I do know a little bit of history is that sometimes they go in and destroy all of the artifacts and things like that. So some of those things that may have existed, have been destroyed and lost to time. Kind of like we do in our country when we tear down statues. So,
Yeah.
I know the Taliban, or not the Taliban, but ISIS, they went in and made it a point, went at it wholeheartedly. I mean, everything they could get their hands on.
Yep.
They blew it up or destroyed it.
And Jonah's tomb, right? They went in and destroyed Jonah's tomb just in the last 10 or 15 years, it seems like, that over there in Iraq. So, and at one point, when they were on the run, ISIS was over there. There was one city, and I think I read a headline, this is the last city for Christianity in Iraq. You know, and they were coming in to take those people out too. And they were destroying all the Christian churches, artifacts, and that's when they blew up Jonah's tomb. So in Nineveh. So yeah, I don't know the answer to that, but I assume that there are some other things that corroborate Nebuchadnezzar to that, and that, you know, somewhere in that would be his story, because that was circulated through the kingdom.
They may be lost forever now.
Yeah, it could be. Other than in the Word of God.
Would you think, since he came back, that they would have gotten rid of everything? I mean, because, you know, there was this vice president that everybody said was awful and stupid and everything, and now she's the greatest thing ever. I mean, don't governments do that? They go in and whitewash, you know.
Communists
so
do.
Nebuchadnezzar wouldn't want any, you know, by talking about him looking like that.
You know, that's hard to tell. I've thought about that too a little bit. It's like, how much did that change him?
Yeah, that'd
You
be
know,
fascinating to find out.
right? How was he still ready, fire, aim? You know, did that change him any in how he acted, or, you know, how he governed? It does seem like it humbled him.
Yeah.
And the one, to me, the one true telling sign of someone in true change of heart is their humbleness.
Yeah.
You know? So, and Daniel brings this up with Belshazzar about his pride and his grandfather's pride and how that changes. So, you know, it might have changed him, you know, and whatever time he had left, because we don't know how long that was, you know, how did that affect things around him? Yeah.
So in chapter 4, Nebuchadnezzar, the king to all peoples, wasn't that his own testimony?
That is his
Like,
testimony, and that was
he
circulated.
wanted people to know.
Yes.
So I don't know that they would have hid it too much.
Yeah. In the post time, though, is what you were asking. After he was gone, did they hide that?
Yeah, after he was gone.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
But I think when he was alive, he probably did tell everybody about it, you know. And everybody, if a person's truly humbled and truly changed like that, everybody would have seen that, you know, in him, because they would all. I mean, it was going to be hard to hide how he lived for 7 years like that. So it is fascinating, and it's kind of telling. I mean, there's a lot of parallels, I think, in that story. With some modern stuff too, you know, and we're going to look at one of those here shortly. But yeah,
I wonder if during that time that he was grazing in the grass, if Daniel didn't tell him what God said would happen, and like, you know, in 6 more years, however long it was,
yep,
he will be restored, and kind of kept things going. Because he was second in command.
yes,
right?
he was.
So essentially, when Nebuchadnezzar was in that state, Daniel was basically in charge.
Yeah,
So he could have told him, this is the story, this is what's going to happen.
yeah.
I don't know.
I mean
I'm guessing.
it makes a lot of sense, and I think that's all we can do
Yeah.
is kind of guess. But it would make sense. God had him strategically there
Yes.
to keep that kingdom from disintegrating from
Right.
within. Because when Nebuchadnezzar was gone, then you see there was murder in the palace, right?
Yeah.
And there was coup after coup, right? And that is not atypical of kind of how monarchies roll.
Yeah.
I think history proves that too.
Not
So,
exactly a democracy.
right. Exactly. But yeah, Connie.
Okay, so if Daniel is not active, and he's retired or
Yeah.
whatever, however you want to put
Right.
it, I wonder why he didn't return to his own people.
Well, he couldn't go. God had them there for those 70 years in Babylon, and there wasn't much to go back to because the Babylonians destroyed everything. When they went back that last time, They wiped out the temple. They destroyed everything. They just left it in ruins. And they only left a few people there to work the ground, a little bit vine dressers and stuff like that. There wasn't anything to go back to at that point, So, but I think by that point, Daniel understood why God had them there, I would say. Again, I'm just guessing from a human nature standpoint, and Daniel being a man of God, it's like, he knew they were there for 70 years, right? He also knew that 70 years was about up, when all this came about. So he was pretty calm, really, in all of this when you read this story.
Would he have been familiar with Jeremiah?
Oh, yeah.
Because Jeremiah says, that God judged that the virgin had done a very, quote unquote, very terrible thing.
Yeah.
And he said, I'm going to judge you accordingly.
Yes,
So
absolutely.
if Daniel knew that, he would have understood.
Yep. And from that, and it looked to me like God was saying, hey, I'm going to do to the Babylonians how they treated my people. They were pretty awful to them, across the board. So, I'm going to shift gears here just slightly. I'm going to say, here. So we got this party, right? So why did Belshazzar throw this party? And why did he do it this way? Excuse me. And what was he trying to say or prove by throwing a party like this?
They were under attack, right?
Yeah.
And I guess he wanted to show that he wasn't worried.
I think that's exactly a part of it. Or just to say, we're Babylon, we've always been here.
Okay.
We're the greatest nation on the earth.
What in the world? Because how many decades were these items from the temple stolen and put in other temples? What made him think of that?
Yeah.
I mean, that's kind of weird.
Exactly. What would be the motivating factor to do that, Yeah, Steve.
I don't know, notation at the bottom said a great feast was probably meant to bolster morale after Nabonidus had experienced a crushing defeat at the hands of the Persians.
Yeah.
And who is Abinadus?
His father.
Oh, that's his dad.
Yeah.
Okay. Just trying to get these people straight.
Yeah. And the other thing, they had to know, I mean, there was no way you were going to hide a big army like the Medes had. Now, they were taken by surprise that night, right? But they had to know they were around the area. I mean, they had to know there was something planned against them. And so this is how I'm thinking, right? This is the parallels I draw to today. So it's like, why did he draw that party? Because we're the greatest nation on the planet. There's no greater nation on the earth than we are, and we've been here. We're always going to be here. Let's celebrate. So I think that's part of it. And the other thing I think was, by drinking from those vessels. Now, those vessels in the temple were holy vessels. Apart from the temple, they meant nothing to anybody except the Jews. Right? So, Babylon had conquered everything on the planet, but perhaps Judah was their greatest accomplishment, right? In one sense. And so they're humiliating the Jews, right, by doing that, by drinking from those. And they're saying, see, this is the trophies of war. I'm just giving some theory here as human nature being what it is. I think this was his way of saying, look, I know what's out there, but you know what? Nobody's ever been able to take us down. Nobody's going to take us down. And I probably in this way, and I don't think he was very old, I would assume by the timeline here, maybe he was in his 20s, mid-20s, something like that. I don't know that unless you're a party guy, at 35, I don't know that you throw a party like this because, all he had probably ever known was, all he ever had was color TV and all the roads were paved when he was born. I'll put it that way. To draw a parallel here, right? So he never had to fight for anything, right? So everything, he came from the time when everything was good. The music was good. The chariots were great. Everything was great. And he didn't have to work hard,
United States.
And that's exactly the parallel I'm drawing, Alan. That's right on. Because, we are in a bad way. We're in serious trouble as a nation. And there are some things that I would have never thought we would be in danger of. But, we throw out, or some of our leaders throw out this thing that, hey, we're still the greatest nation on the earth. Okay, but that doesn't mean we're not vulnerable,
Right.
You're being very short-sighted if you think we're not vulnerable now. And I think the reason we're vulnerable, there's a spiritual connection to this. And the reason we're vulnerable is because God is doing to us what he did to Babylon and what he did to Judah before that. He's pulling because he's going to raise them up and he's going to put it down. And if Daniel, these first 6 chapters of Daniel teaches anything, is the sovereignty of God to do that. We're on his timeline. All of us are on his timeline. Every nation is on his timeline. And he's pushing us to his planned outcome. And what is his planned outcome? That Jesus Christ is going to rule and reign on earth. There will be no one greater than that, But I think the parallel here is very much that. Is that, we're the greatest nation on the earth and nobody's going to take us down, and let's party. Because, right?
Yeah.
So that is, everything was great until the hand shows up,
And we can be humbled.
And we can be humbled pretty quickly. The other example I had here, in a way, so the question is, why did Belshazzar do that party, and why did he do it that way? Okay, what was he trying to say? And I throw this back, and I'm not trying to grandstand here. I'm just throwing this back to the opening of the Olympics. Why did they do that, and what were they trying to say? Right? So it's the same, in that same parallel where we live right now, it's like, what were they trying to say? Well, I think they were trying to say what Belshazzar says. We're greater than whatever these religious people who believe Almighty God are. I think there's this parallel. And it's saying, to me, it's kind of the same thing. We're greater than all that. Those religious people, they got nothing on us, so to speak. So what he was mocking the Jews, and I think you can make a really solid case that this opening of the Olympics was mocking Christianity and mocking the West,
Yeah, big time.
And you go, why were they doing that? Well, why were they doing that? Well, ultimately, there's an evil piece that is, driving the train, so to speak. And the same thing with Belshazzar. Their whole culture was based on paganism, pagan worship, which is what? Demonic worship. They worship the gods of anything but God. And that's kind of where we're at even now in our country. We don't worship trees. Well, some do, now that I say that out loud. But you know what I'm saying? Our mindset is not a godly mindset. And it's more and more away from God as we go on. And I think, the parallels here are just amazing, quite frankly, between that and where we're living today, and what these final days of Babylon. Those were the final days of Babylon. In fact, chapter 5 is the final day of Babylon. And you go, how about that? It's kind of the same way here. We just keep talking about we're great because we're great. Babylon's great because it's great. But there's nothing really to support that, Any thoughts on
I just thought of another parallel to it. A lot of times the last thing we think of is when we're on our knees praying. Should have done that to begin with.
Yeah.
What did they think of last? Daniel. He knows this holy God. It was the last thing. First they called their astrologers. They didn't have an answer. So maybe we ought to try Daniel.
Yeah. Maybe we ought to call in the Christians.
Maybe
see if
we'll
somebody
call
knows
in
how to pray, right?
Yes.
Yeah. And probably when things start to get crazy, that's what's going to happen. And people go, well, I know that person knows how to pray. Call them. And this is why I believe the Christians are going to be here for a short period of time when things go sideways.
It was too late then. It was too late once they finally called on.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
That's a good point.
Just hoping it's not too late for us.
Yes, it might be too late for us as a nation,
That's what I'm talking about.
but it's not too late for individuals
Oh, no,
to turn around, right?
that's very true.
This isn't home.
Right.
I was talking to a buddy of mine today on the phone and about what you gonna do. I mean, look what he already did with the twin towers, but they stopped the other two planes. I mean, what's he gonna do to America to greater than that? To wake us up. I mean, it's coming. We were talking about what how many stadiums could be blown up, or whatever. It's just unbelievable what can happen.
Yes.
I've been to the memorial site where that plane went down in Pennsylvania, and they're listening to all the recordings. They think a lot of the people on the plane were thinking that was going to Washington D.C. to the White House
Yeah.
or the Capitol building. They don't know which one, but God spared us then. Like, here's your wake up call.
Yes.
But it's kind of like He spared the third plane.
Yep.
But at the sacrifice of a lot of very brave people. Because it's very disturbing to listen to those people's, you can hear all the recordings that they sent their loved ones, and this is, tell them goodbye and all that good stuff. 'Cause they knew they were going down.
The majority, put this in perspective here,
Okay.
the majority of these young people who are competing in the Olympics right now have been born after 9/11,
Exactly.
right?
Yes.
I've heard about that, but I didn't see it, right? I heard about Daniel. I never saw him,
Right.
Exactly.
I've heard about Jesus.
Yes. And Danny, every time, what you just said gave me goosebumps, because every time I think about it, it gives me goosebumps. What would it take? What's it going to take?
Yeah, how many baseball games or football games are going on, at a certain period of time, and gee whiz.
I used to, Rush Limbaugh, I listened to him a lot when he was alive, and he used to say, there are no coincidences.
No, that's so true.
And I used to think, well, what does that mean? And then as time went on, I go, oh, I think I see what he's saying. So last week when they uploaded a security piece of software and it shut down all the flights? There were worldwide flight delays. And somebody said, that's just a warm up for what's coming, right? I mean, that was one thing. One thing stopped a lot of global air
Oh
travel.
my God. Don't you think maybe that was just kind of a dry run? Like, let's
Yeah.
just see.
Yeah. So, now, you go, well, that wasn't God doing it. Well, no, that wasn't necessarily God doing it. But in the right scenario, in the wrong hands, God's going to give the ability to somebody like He gave to Babylon to overcome Judah, and like He gave to the Medes to overcome Babylon. God's going to open the door for somebody to do something that He's going to allow them to do to get their attention or to bring judgment on them.
Now, doesn't that fall in with that Satanism, that army or whatever with the double lightning bolts? I mean, they're out there, right? I mean,
Well, yeah, there's a lot of evil out there right now. And like the opening of that Olympic, that was demonic.
Oh my gosh. It was.
There was an article, several great
watch it.
articles.
I didn't watch it.
I didn't see it either, and I was actually caught some of it. Twitter started blowing up about it. I was like, oh, don't turn it on. I want to see it now. But there was an article that talked about it was demonic, and it brought up in this article, a lot of the Grammy Awards, and this is true. I mean, I as a music lover, I've watched the Grammy Awards all my life, but I'm telling you, they're getting dark. I've quit watching the show because it's very demonic. There's something kind of, and they said even the Super Bowl halftime shows, and that is spot on. There's this vibe that has overshadowed some of that stuff. And it wasn't this year. I think it was last year. And this guy they're creating the scenario, like this guy's coming, there's fire and stuff coming out of this pit. I forget who that guy was. But it's like, oh, this, and so I just turn it off when the halftime show's on. But this is, so we're becoming very much open about this. So how, the demonic things are being celebrated. The demonic things are coming open. And, and in that, we go, hey, everything's great. It's just the way, this is great. Or they say, there was an article that came out today, Tim Moore and Ray shared that. I sent it to Ray and Alan, and I think Ray shared it out. But his point is this, he's saying, some people merely see this as a natural social cycle, what we're going through. It's just normal. We go and it's what they used to say, kids are going to be kids and they'll figure it out. And every generation thinks that the next generation to follow them is the worst generation ever. But there's something different. And I had somebody here recently this summer, we were talking to their friends and they're the age of all my kids. And JP and I and this guy were talking, and he said, okay, I got a question for you, Steve. He said, when you were raising kids, did you feel like things would get better for them? I said, yeah, I did feel like things would be better for them. He said, do you think, like, raising kids now, if you were raising kids now, do you think things would be better for them? I said, I don't feel that way now. That was 25 years ago. I felt like things would be better. Things are always going to be better, but there's something that has shifted. And I would tell you the linchpin for that to me is 9/11. You mentioned 9/11, and I think that was the mark that God said, are you paying attention or not? Because nothing's been the same for the United States since then.
Everybody paid attention for how long, and then it just
about 3 months.
Yeah.
And then everything kind of, it's okay. Go back to your regularly scheduled life.
Now, is there is 7, like a 7, lightning bolt 7, is that a demonic sign?
I'm not familiar necessarily with what you're talking about on that.
I seen a country singer with that hat, with that on his hat. It was a 7 and a lightning bolt and a 7. I was, that ain't right.
Yeah, I'm not sure on that one. I have to do some checking on that one.
That don't look right. I mean, that doesn't seem right.
But there are a lot of demonic symbolic stuff that's showing up in a lot of places now, on people wearing on shirts and hats, and it's in music and it's in videos, and I'm telling you right now, there's most, if I'm watching TV, and I don't watch it that much, but there's movie stuff comes on and the promos for these movies, and I'm muting it. I don't even want to hear it, and some of them, this sounds goofy as all get out. I close my eyes or put my head here. I don't want to see it either. It's just like, I just don't want to see it, because it's becoming very dark, and you go, well, why is this happening? Well, I think it's happening because we're turning ourselves away from God. We don't want God involved, and He's going, if you want me involved, I'll get out of the way, right? And so kind of in that same way, this parallel here, Belshazzar, I'm going to bring this back here because there's another couple good points here about this, but he had heard of Daniel, right? There are young people that have not gone to church. I've heard about church, but it doesn't sound like it's got anything for me, right? And they don't go for whatever reason. I've heard about it, but I don't go to church, kind of thing. And so Belshazzar had heard about Daniel, it's just fascinating. Let me carry on here because it kind of ties in here a little bit. Look at verse 13. It says, Daniel was brought in before the king. The king spoke and said to Daniel, are you the Daniel who is one of the exiles from Judah, whom my father the king brought from Judah? Now I have heard about you, that a spirit of the gods is in you, and that illumination, insight, and extraordinary wisdom have been found in you. Just now the wise men and the conjurers were brought in before me, that they might read this inscription and make the interpretation known to me. But they could not declare the interpretation of the message. But I personally have heard about you. See, I personally have heard about you, that you're able to give interpretations and solve difficult problems. Now, if you are able to read the inscription and make its interpretation known to me, you will be clothed with purple and wear a necklace of gold around your neck, and you will have authority to rule as a third ruler in the kingdom, which is again sign that he wasn't number one, he was number two. Verse 17. Then Daniel answered and said to him before the king, this is one of the greatest lines ever. The Bible, he says, keep your gifts for yourself or give your rewards to someone else. Because Daniel had already seen what was written there and he knows, right? However, I will read the inscription to the king and make the interpretation known to him. O king, the most high God granted sovereignty, grandeur, glory, and majesty to Nebuchadnezzar your father. Because of the grandeur which he bestowed on him, all the peoples, nations, and men of every language feared and trembled before him. Whomever he wished he killed, and whomever he wished he spared alive, and whomever he wished he elevated, and whomever he wished he humbled. But when his heart was lifted up and his spirit became so proud that he behaved arrogantly, he was deposed from his royal throne and his glory was taken away from him. He was also driven away from mankind, and his heart was made like that of the beasts. And his dwelling place was with the wild donkeys. And he was given grass to eat like cattle. And his body was drenched with the dew of heaven until he recognized that the Most High God is ruler over the realm of mankind, and that he sets over it whomever he wishes. Yet you, his son Belshazzar, you've not humbled your heart, even though you knew all of this. I love that verse. You knew all this. This is not the first time you've heard this story, right? All right, verse 23. But you have exalted yourself against the Lord of heaven and have brought the vessels of his house before you. You and your nobles, your wives and your concubines have been drinking wine from them, and you have praised the gods of silver and gold, of bronze, iron, wood, and stone. And remember, Daniel wasn't at this party, right? So God has shown him, this is what's going on, right? And you have praised the gods of silver and gold and bronze and iron, wood and stone, which do not see, hear, or understand. But the God in whose hands are your life breath and all your ways, you have not glorified. Then the hand was set from him, and this inscription was written out. All right, so we're almost stop right there for a second. So Daniel saw this, and he knew exactly what was about to happen, right? And he's just telling you knew all this. This is not the first time you've heard this. You knew exactly this story. You knew exactly what happened to your grandfather. And you've allowed yourself no change. So,
can you imagine talking to the king like that?
I know.
He's like, what?
Yeah. And that's what McGee said. McGee said, first of all, he said, if he hadn't been drunk, he might not have taken it the way he took it, Belshazzar.
And he was scared.
Yeah, and he's scared, you know. And he let Daniel let Daniel speak to him like that without putting Daniel down. But Daniel was like, what's he got to lose?
No kidding.
We know, the United States, we know we've been given more opportunity with God's word than any country in the world.
Yeah.
Belshazzar got Daniel, a Jew, to explain what's going on.
Yep.
Let me throw this out. The young man that tried to kill President Trump, he had a cell phone that the FBI couldn't, there was something encrypted on the phone that the FBI couldn't get it out.
Mm-hmm.
Who did they go to? Israel.
No.
Mhm.
Did they really?
They
Yes.
did.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yep.
That's fascinating.
Just like
Israel.
That just gave me chills. Thank you, Helen. That's amazing.
Did they solve it then, Israel? What it said?
I'm not sure if they've solved it yet or not.
I'm sure they will.
They
I mean,
will.
You look in the past couple,
Yeah.
24 hours, I think it speaks volumes about Israel's ability on the intelligence of those two individuals. that they
Yeah.
killed.
Yeah. Because God is with them.
They are smart people.
Total sidebar, but that alone should make people aware, hey, God is with this country,
Yeah.
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
So, anyway, yes.
There's a really good lesson here. Daniel says, you may keep your gifts for yourself. When Satan tempts you, don't even give it a second thought.
Oh, yeah.
Shut it down.
Yep. That's a great point. Yeah, because he didn't need all that stuff,
No.
you know. Anybody else? I think that's one of the greatest scenes in all of the Bible right there. They talk about speaking truth to power.
Yeah.
He was speaking truth to power there.
Be bold.
Be bold. And I think the question is, throwing back kind of into where we're at now, it's like, how many people have heard the story of salvation and the gospel of Jesus Christ? Notwithstanding, there's a lot of churches that don't preach it, right? I mean, I get that. So part of this is on the church because we quit preaching the truth. But there's just a lot of people who have heard. It's like, I'll come me and the Lord are good. I worship on Sunday mornings, just me and the Lord. Where? Well, just us together, right?
We've had it so good for so long. I mean, just been a wonderful life here in America. And to try to tell people now that this could possibly be coming to an end, they don't want to hear it.
Yeah.
Don't want to believe it.
Right.
No, you're interpreting Scripture wrong. That can't be right.
Yeah.
God wouldn't judge us like that.
As it was in the days of Noah.
Yeah.
Not only do they,
Go ahead.
not only do they think God isn't going to judge us, they don't think He can.
Right.
They
Yeah.
don't think He's even involved,
Right.
which just blows my mind.
That does.
Yeah.
Yeah. Kind
And then there's the whole realm of people that haven't been in church,
Yeah.
don't know what, they're missing, and do still believe that that their children are going to have a better life than them.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Because they just don't understand what's happening,
Right.
But I,
and how do you even begin to,
where do you start? Yeah.
yeah.
That's,
We've had bad times before. We're going to come out of it again.
oh sure.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So, what kind of, in this discussion we've had tonight, what kind of bad thing is going to have to happen to
Yeah.
get people's attention?
Something pretty horrible. If 9/11 didn't hardly shake anybody at all. They got over it immediately.
Right.
I mean, so many churches were packed, and then
And then they weren't.
and we're done. We're over it.
Yep. It's all good now. Alan?
Looking to your children having it better. 1 Corinthians 2:9, eye has not seen, ear heard, nor into the heart of man, the things that God has prepared for those that love it.
Yes.
The others, it's entirely different stuff.
And let me add to that. If you love me, you will keep my commandments.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Amen.
Right.
Yep.
Who had a hand up back here? Oh. I thought it was Alec or
Yeah.
mine.
I was talking to Steve, my husband Steve. I have to say which Steve.
Yes.
Oh.
Several of us.
Because his mother is Lutheran, and a lot of their family's Lutheran, raised Methodist. I was raised Catholic. There's entire denominations that don't talk about this.
Right.
He and I were talking about this, and he's like, I went to church all my life, raised in 2 different churches, because his mom was still Lutheran, raised in the Methodist church in D-Land. And he goes, this is the first time, talking about some of your sermons we were discussing, first time I've ever heard this stuff. I'm like, oh my gosh, those are huge denominations.
Yeah.
And it's like, you think they're Christian, but they're not teaching the Bible.
Right. Right. Which is super scary.
Oh,
And it's gotten more so, I suppose.
well, yeah. Well, they keep watering it down
Yeah. Yeah.
because people don't want to hear that.
Right. No, they don't.
Scary.
They don't.
They will have to change their ways, and we don't want to do that.
No. No. Or they'll quit coming, or they'll quit giving,
Oh,
or
yeah.
there's a whole host of things that I suppose that motivate that. But yeah, it is. I don't know what it's going to take. But human nature being what it is, and I throw this back into the parenting realm. A child who the more strong-willed they are, you have to be a little more strong in your judgment with them, right? And to get them to pay attention. And it's the same, human nature being what it is, and it's like they're not listening. They're not listening to the words. I really want them to listen to the words. They don't listen to the words. Some of the preachers aren't even preaching the words. So I'm gonna have to do something to get their attention. And I just say that that I think that is the heart of God, to bring people back to Him, is the heart of a parent, to bring that child back to them, and he's going to do what a good parent would do, is like, this. I don't want to really be this harsh, but I'm going to have to be harsh with this child that's strong-willed.
That's an excellent analogy. That is amazing.
So, well, what's scary is, though, we have had 9/11, and we've had other things since then. We had COVID.
Yeah.
And I feel like for a very short time, when we were allowed to leave the house, there were a few people who go, yeah, I'm going back to church. It wasn't anything like 9/11, but it was just a short period of time. I felt like there was a little bit of that, and then that wore off too, But I don't know what it's going to take. And again, I specifically say I'm not a prophet, I'm a pastor. But I do think the understanding how God rolls, it's going to be harsh, because it's going to have to be harsh to try to get the attention. And part of judgment is to make wrong right, and part of judgment is to bring people back to Him in the midst of that, so that they seek Him out. And we are priests, right? We are our royal priesthood, and we are the priests connect people to God, and that's why we're going to be here for that short time.
Going back to your parallel with a parent and a child, you do this discipline, and then the next time maybe it's a little harsher. Next time a little harsher. Well, I'm thinking, this is me just thinking out loud. God is probably the same way. If you didn't listen this time, maybe you're going to listen this time, and it just keeps, at some point,
What he done to me.
you're going to wake up, or yeah. Well,
What he done to me.
and I think He can do that with a nation.
Oh yeah.
So
Around, son, you're going the wrong way.
Oh yeah.
Every time, man.
yeah,
I think He's going to do that. I hope not,
yes.
but I think He's going to do that with this nation. And some have. I've read some things that what we're experiencing right now is part of this judgment. In a New Testament kind of a way, Old Testament is God's active wrath. New Testament is God's passive wrath. Passive wrath is the consequences of your choices. So if you want to live a lie, well, you're going to end up living the lie, right? If you want to be devoid of the truth, well, then you can end up living in the lie, whatever the lie happens to be, right? And you can think of a lot of examples for that. I only have to pick one out for you. But at sooner or later, when you're trying to live the lie and say what is not true is true, then it comes back to roost. It's like, well, that's not true at all. Well, yeah, we know it's not true, but now you're here. This is what you wanted. I'm going to give you what you want. And I think that's very much the heart of God in that sense. He wants to be involved with us, but if we don't want Him, He's out, in that sense.
About that chip thing, if you don't take that, are you going to get in trouble, or
Yeah, you're going to get in trouble.
So if you don't take the chip or whatever it is,
You won't be able to buy food or anything.
so I know you can grow your own food. I can go out and catch my own. I can go out and catch my own meat.
Right.
So I ain't working on. But I just want to know if they're gonna, kind of come get me and take me to jail or what.
Yes, they are. I would tell you that's exactly what they're going to
It
do.
will be
Okay.
absolute punishment.
All right.
Not only to the point here, not only can't you buy food, you're not going to be able to pay for your car. Oh, you
don't do
already
anything.
paid for it.
Right? So if you have a car payment, you have insurance on that car. Well, you can't pay for it. You can't make any kind of transaction without that chip. So if you don't have insurance on that car, or you can't buy gas, what are you going to do now? You aren't even going to get yourself to the woods to hunt your own meat, right?
You're gonna stand out. They're gonna know whose troublemakers are,
Yep.
Yeah.
and they're gonna come for you.
Yeah.
They're already tracking us. They already know where we're at. They already know what we're up to. Because you betcha.
They hear everything on these things right here.
Oh yeah, they do.
That's true.
Mm-hmm.
That's true. My son-in-law and I were talking about on the phone, had a phone call on Apple devices, by the way, that have an ad out there right now. We're something about your security, your privacy. We're all about your privacy. What the
Yeah.
Apple ad I've seen here just
yeah.
this the last couple of days. And on our Apple devices, we were talking about QuickBooks and options for QuickBooks. In my Twitter feed this morning
Yes.
was an ad for something that wasn't QuickBooks. I'm going, and I sent it, screenshot it, sent it to JP. I said, how about that? Isn't it just amazing that your phone doesn't listen to you?
It is amazing how much they pick up
Oh, man.
when you think it is not listening. It is
So-
listening to everything.
Yeah, it is.
It is creepy.
So,
Yeah.
do you go ahead and take the?
No!
No,
Absolutely not.
you gotta
In that moment, here's what may happen. There's a dividing line.
Right.
That's the start of the tribulation period. The tribulation will not start until the rapture. The pre-tribulation rapture happens, all right? Christians leave, and that's the beginning of the tribulation period. It's in that period of time that it says you take that mark and you've eternally put yourself in hell. Okay? I have, in the last couple years, and Ray and I have talked about this a little bit, have come to the opinion, I think they're going to try, prior to the tribulation period, to start getting people to take it. They've already done that, right? There was a guy up in Milwaukee or something like that did it, and he walks on to planes and pays for stuff, and then I think it was Sweden or Switzerland. Sweden.
I've seen videos of people that the younger
They love it.
generation
They
think
love
it's
it.
cool.
Yeah.
They think it's
Everything's
great.
safe. It can't
They
steal
don't
my
have to carry
identity.
a purse or a wallet.
Yeah.
Go straight to-
Eternal damnation for taking that.
Yeah.
Because the Antichrist will set himself as everything, right? Right?
I think you're right about them trying, but there's a big dividing line, I think. Correct me if I'm wrong. During the tribulation period, when you take that, you're committing yourself
Yeah.
to this regime, the Antichrist or whatever. If prior to that time, they may want you to take a chip, but you're not committing, you're not, saying I don't believe in Christ anymore or anything like that. It's just
Right.
a chip, and it's like a credit card.
Correct.
So if you took it at this point in time, I don't think it's a big deal.
Correct.
But-
That's the way I understand it.
Right, but if you take it later on and you deny Christ and your allegiances to the Antichrist, that's a whole different story.
But I'm still not taking it, right?
Yeah.
In the original Obamacare, that document is deep and wide. Scott Busboom was on the radio, a friend of mine, Indicator, and he was telling me this story. He said, and we had this guy in who had been with the government, and he's telling us, we don't want Obamacare, we don't want that because there's stuff in that nobody knows about. And he said, and Scott's telling me the story, and he says in this on page whatever it is that there's about implanting chips into people starting with babies, and Scott says, I thought the guy was out of his mind. And he said, so my producer looked up online while he was talking, looked up online and got that document and looked through the window. He said, he's right. It was there.
Oh, I don't doubt it.
And it was like, whoa.
There's a lot of bad things there. I sat in on some of the hearings before they actually printed it up. Some of that stuff in there was just horrendous. Most people got up and walked out
Yeah.
because it was just too awful.
Yeah.
Because anybody who went to the nursing home was immediately a DNR, and they were going to take all of their medication except pain medication away from them. Insulin, they were talking everything.
Yeah.
Like they really weren't going to decrease the population, and that's a lot of what it was about.
And in that, you see how we are moving away from God. When you move away from God, you take the heart and compassion, right?
Yes.
Satan has no compassion.
Well, this was completely heartless.
Yeah.
Completely like, yeah, they're going to die anyway, and they can die peacefully this way.
Right.
Because this is torture. They were turning it around like, this is the best thing we could do.
Right.
This is taking care of these people. No.
Love of many will grow cold.
Yes. Exactly
Oh
right.
my gosh. You
Exactly
want to
right.
talk about heartless. Those people are heartless.
And this is all part of this judgment that God's gonna. He's bringing these things about. This is the consequences of our own choices of
Exactly.
what our culture looks like without Him, what our churches look like without Him, what our churches look like when preachers stop preaching gospel and start preaching whatever it is they're preaching. And so this is how you get to here, right?
Yeah.
So when judgment comes, I'm going to make a hard turn here. When judgment starts to come, it'll come sometimes it's drip feed. You could call the last 3 years drip feed judgment, starting with 9/11. But there comes a point when it all happens, right?
Mm-hmm.
So let's go to Daniel chapter 5:25. So Daniel's here. He says, "I'll read this to you. I'm gonna tell you. You already knew that Nebuchadnezzar, had a pride issue. You've got a pride issue. You know all that, and you didn't allow it to change you. And I'll read this to you. And here's what it says. Right. So here's what it says. Verse 25. Now this is the inscription that was written out. Mene, tekel, upharsin, or Perez. Some of them will say Mene, tekel, upharsin. This is the interpretation of the message. Meaning, God has numbered your kingdom and put an end to it. Tekel, you have been weighed on the scales and found deficient. Perez, your kingdom has been divided and given over to the Medes and the Persians. In other words, it's done. This is a done deal. That's God's statement of judgment on you. Verse 29. Then Belshazzar doesn't say what he says after that. Just says, all right. So he gave orders. He clothed Daniel with purple and put a necklace of gold around his neck and issued a proclamation concerning him that he now had authority as the third ruler of the kingdom. Verse 30. That same night, Belshazzar, the Chaldean king, was slain. So Darius the Mede received the kingdom at about the age of 62. So that party had an abrupt ending. The Medes got into Babylon, which is almost impenetrable. The wall was about four lanes wide. It was thick, so you could drive chariot up around it, right? They had built that to be as defensive as possible. It only had one thing, and it wasn't possible until it was. The Euphrates River, right? Went through there, was the aqueduct, and so the Medes rerouted the river.
Yep.
And they dried, so that the main channel then dried up. They rerouted the river back out of this canal that the Babylonians had made to go through the city. They rerouted it, dammed it up, went around, and then they walked under the gate.
How did they not know that they were making this?
This is where I'm telling you, I think they did know. I think they knew. Well, I think Belshazzar knew exactly something was going on. You couldn't hide the fact that you were rerouting the canal and the river, right? Somebody knew.
That's a big river,
right? Unless they were just blinded by it. God didn't let them see it. There could be that. But I'm kind of, after reading the story and thinking about it, I think he might have known. Yeah, we know. I'm going to put it this way.
That they weren't going to do, any damage.
We know that in the United States of America, there are foreign nationals who have walked across our border, thousands, tens of thousands, that are military of age.
Mm-hmm.
We know that our enemies have bought property, land in our country. And it's like, we're still the greatest nation on the earth. It's like, how do you not worry about this?
They own all the hog farms. They own all the hog processing facilities. They own most of the cattle farms. They own our food.
They own Smithfield Foods, right?
Exactly, the biggest, and ConAgra. They own all these big companies. That's our food supply.
And a German company owns one of the big seed companies, right?
The German and I think Japanese. German owns everything. German owns most of the big pharma.
Okay.
And they own this. They own our seeds.
So,
and somewhere they've got all these frozen seeds in case Armageddon. Their words.
Yeah.
In case that happens, they've got a supply of seeds.
Right.
That won't be radiated.
So how did the Babylonians not see this happening?
Oh.
Same way the Americans don't see this happening. In that sense, and I don't want to go over the top here, but I'm just bringing parallels here.
Sure.
That when judgment's coming, you don't pay attention. You're not seeing it.
see it and don't want to believe it.
Yeah,
Yeah, oh, sure.
yeah,
Yeah, don't want to believe it. I mean, we're the greatest nation in the world, right?
right.
Have been
Can't happen.
have been for decades.
Yep.
Probably where they was having the party is like in the middle of the city, and they figured if something happens out at the wall, they would know and be able to,
Yeah,
or something. But for them to just invade right up into the middle of the city
yep.
and take out the king, they didn't see that.
They may have had some way to divert the river suddenly.
Yeah,
You
Oh,
know,
that's possible.
dig a trench up to it and then have an avalanche block this off, shift it, and it happens quick.
right.
It's hard to say.
It's hard. It is hard to say. Can't imagine how they did it, but somehow they did it, and God allowed it to happen, and that is the key. Daniel said it here. God raises up these people. He's the one who's involved in the affairs of men. He's told his grandfather the same thing. And you know, and again, I don't want to go political. I'm not going political. I'm telling you right now. If we're all waiting on Air Force One to fix the problems, Air Force One is not going to fix the problems, regardless of who's riding it.
That's true.
This is not an Air Force One problem that we're facing right now. This is spiritual warfare, and this is a God problem that we have. And this is God's the only thing that's going to fix this, because God's the one that's bringing the problem.
Air Force One will be in the air.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's the hearts of people.
Mm.
It is the hearts of people. You know.
That's what has, you know. Some of them are pretty hard.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And it is a spiritual warfare.
Yes.
And we sit here and we talk about it and we bring up these points that we can relate what's going on and relate it to, you know, what we read in the Bible. But if somebody that is not of the church,
Right.
they would sit back and say, you guys are a bunch of crazies.
Yeah.
And they do say that.
Yeah.
They do.
And that's right.
And how do you witness to someone like that?
Remember, they said that to Paul. Your great learning's made you mad. What is wrong with you? Right? That's what they said to Apostle Paul.
That's where the church has failed in teaching the word to each generation, you know, because it's been lost. You know,
Right.
not all the churches have been teaching all the word. And so it's been lost, and to just come back and throw this on somebody all at once, they think, you're crazy.
Yeah.
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 If you wait till a child can make up their own mind, you've waited too long.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, I think you have to start when they're little. And this is why
Yes.
Deuteronomy says you talk about it when you sit